after this class. So once again, this is the pie dough and crimping virtual class. I'm Lisa, and tonight I'm going to be showing how to make our all butter pie dough, which is what we use for all of our pie recipes, and then also how to roll out some crusts and do the decorative crimping. So my plan is that I'll do both of those things. So I'll make a batch of dough, talk you through it as I go, and then I'm going to demonstrate rolling out the crust and crimping it. And then once I'm done with the full demo, we'll move into kind of the second part of the virtual demo, which is a Q&A. So any questions that you have about anything that I'm doing, feel free to kind of maybe jot them down. You can even put them in the chat box and I can open that up when it's time. So if you think of something, just, chat it in there. Before we get started, I would love it if anybody in the chat box would write where they are, they're from tonight, because I know we got some people from different parts of the country. Of course, we're here in Detroit. Vancouver, that's amazing. I love that. Grosse Pointe Park, very, very local, close to us. Cleveland, Warren. Okay, so some Midwestern folks for sure. Chicago. Awesome. All right. Does anyone have any questions before I get started on the demonstration? All right. Looks good. Okay. I'm over here, and can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I might be shouting a little bit. And if there's a point where you can't hear me, just leave a message in the chat box and I'll try to bring the computer closer. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is make the all butter pie dough. So this is a very, simple recipe, straightforward ingredients and technique. And it's the basis of all of the pies that we make at Sister Pie. Sometimes we make different types of pie dough. We might make one that has cheese in it, or we might make one with a different type of flour. This is our basic recipe that's our go-to, so that once you really understand the technique of this one, then you can kind of branch out into the other types. Okay, so in this bowl, I have all-purpose flour, a little bit of sugar, and a little bit of salt. Get a little bit closer, okay? So these are my dry ingredients. The first thing I'm going to do is just use my pastry blender or my fingers to mix up the dry ingredients. This batch is going to make us 2 discs of pie dough. Okay, so the next thing I need to do is make sure that I have my liquid. If you've ever made pie dough before, you might remember a step where you have to add a little bit of water to the dough toward the end of the mixing process. And I use a big pitcher and I fill it up with a little bit of water about a couple of hours before I'm going to get started. I put it in the freezer and let it freeze solid. Then when it's time for me to start making the pie dough, I take it out of the freezer. I pour some tap water on top, and then I give it a healthy splash of apple cider vinegar. It's just enough to kind of make the water turn like the color of apple juice. And the apple cider vinegar is kind of a traditional ingredient for some people's pie dough recipes. It's often thought to inhibit the gluten formation in the dough, which kind of would lead to a flakier crust if you inhibit the gluten formation. I'm not totally sure if the science on that is all there, but we're really focused on that the technique is the most important thing in getting the flakiest dough. But the apple cider vinegar kind of has a little bit of a tangy flavor too. So it is kind of multi-purpose, and it's definitely something that makes the dough taste like Sister Pie dough. So you can use vinegar at home if you like. You don't have to. But I've got some here, and I'll use that in a little bit. And add a little more water. Okay, now I'm going to get the most important ingredient, which is the butter. So I'm making, a batch that has 2 discs of dough. So we've got 2 sticks of butter, AKA a ½ pound of butter. I got it straight from the refrigerator, so it's super cold. I'm going to place it in the bowl and then just use my fingers to coat it in flour. Your butter might come in stick form. We get our butter in pound blocks. So we just sliced this butter in half. This is a European style unsalted butter, which means that it has a higher butterfat percentage than traditional American style butter, which mostly means that it just makes the pie dough taste even better. So the next thing I'll do is take my bench scraper and I'm going to use it to cut the butter into cubes. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut this in half. And then with each stick, I'm going to quarter it lengthwise. Aiming to do it as evenly as possible, but that doesn't always happen. So like this, for example, I didn't really do it super even, but you get the idea. I'm going to kind of group all the butter together, and then I'm going to cut across, doing about ½ inch cubes. So cutting all the way through to the bottom of the bowl. Okay, this is what it looks like now. All right. Now I'm going to use my fingers to continue to break up the butter bits and coat them with flour. All right, so it's broken into cubes. I am going to go back to using the bench scraper. By the way, this is, one of my most prized kitchen tools. It is not very fancy, but it has multiple purposes. I use it to clean off a countertop, cut butter, pick things up and put them into a skillet, portion dough, help shape things. It's a very helpful tool for making any sort of baked goods. So just wanted to kind of give you that. And now I'm going to use it to break the butter up a little bit more before we start to use the pastry blender. So to do that, I'm just going to kind of rotate the bowl and slice down onto the butter. With this movement, I'm trying to cut each cube of butter in half or so, just breaking it down a little bit. So you'll make a lot of noise. This is one of the reasons that I like to use a stainless steel bowl, because it can generally take a lot of abuse. And with pie dough, we're going to be using tools and really kind of cutting into things all the way to the bottom of the bowl. So these are very sturdy bowls. Okay, so now it looks like this. I'm going to move on to the pastry blender. This is a tool that we use to cut butter into flour. You could use it to make biscuits or scones, and pie dough are the main uses for it. This one has 5 little blades. They're not as sharp as a knife, but they're sharp enough, just kind of like this bench scraper, to easily cut through the butter. So I'm going to use this with a very repetitive motion. I'm going to aim the pastry blender at the center of the bowl while I rotate it, making sure that I'm slicing through butter every time. So really putting my muscle into it, aiming at the center of the bowl and just moving the bowl helps to make sure that I'm kind of evenly making the dough. Every once in a while, I'll stop because this blender will get kind of clogged up. I'm gonna clean out the blades, get all those butter bits out of there. You don't want them to stay in there too much because they could start to get warm if they're not mixed in with the other ingredients. So I'm gonna kind of use the pastry blender to mix things up and keep going. I'm going to do this step until the butter is like a particular size. Some of it is going to look like the size and shape of peas or pistachios. And then everything else, all of the other butter throughout will appear sort of like finely grated Parmesan cheese. So a very delicious sounding mix of ingredients that you're looking for. Peas, pistachios, and then finely grated Parmesan cheese, like the kind that you would put on top of pizza after it's been cooked. Okay, continuing to clean out the pastry blender. This step takes a little bit of time. So I like to talk about how important it is to keep things cold, because if we keep things cold, that allows the butter to maintain its fat structure. It's not melting and kind of becoming homogeneous with the rest of the ingredients like it would be if you were mixing a cookie dough, for example. You're trying to cream the butter and sugar together so that it can then become one with the flour and the other ingredients, and it's one dough. With this, we want the butter to kind of remain separate from the dough. Of course, it's going to be all in there, but the chunks will be surrounded by flour. And so keeping the butter really cold and using cold liquid helps to make sure that that butter doesn't melt. Working quickly helps too, but you need a lot of practice to kind of get that speed going. If you are just getting started on pie dough and you haven't done it before, you're a little worried, you could always put your bowl with the ingredients in it in the refrigerator or freezer before you get started. That will sort of give you a more chill experience to begin. Now, I'm going to get a little closer, show you what we got. So this is what it looks like. And we've got pieces that are, sorry about that. We have sometimes we use like a camera that goes down, but it wasn't working tonight. So this is my best effort. You see, that's about the size of peas. Everything else is kind of this finely grated cheese. All right. Okay, now I'm going to add the liquid. I'm going to do a half cup. Got flour all over my shirt. Pour it right in the center. Now I'm going to use my bench scraper again. I'm going to move the ingredients around the bowl until I don't see visible pools of liquid. So just like this. So now I don't see visible pools of liquid. It's time for me to bring the dough together. So to do that, I'm going to use 3 basic steps. I'm going to scoop up as many of the ingredients as I can, kind of going almost under the ingredients, pressing down, rotating the bowl, and repeating. Scoop, press, turn. Scoop under, press down, turn. Scoop, press, turn. Right away, this is going to help a dough start to form, but you're also going to notice that there's lots of floury bits at the bottom of the bowl. So you kind of see it like that. You might get a little frustrated. So what I try to do is I'll scoop up as many of those floury bits as I can. I'll place them on top of the dough and kind of fold it in. So really, the entire process is just repeating these steps. Scoop, press, turn. It will eventually, we'll just keep doing it until the dough fully comes together. So a lot of times when people are making pie dough, I see them kind of going like this on top of it. Really, if you can put in your upper body strength and your palms, that will help the dough come together faster. Okay, we're getting really close. I'm gonna kind of grab this last bit of flour. We'll know that the dough is done when we don't see the floury bits on the bottom. It's definitely a bit of a more challenging time. Okay. So I had a little bit of extra flour. I'm going to do a fold on the table. I'm going to bring it over here to show you. You can see those kind of chunks of butter in there. Like I said earlier, this is going to make enough for 2 discs of pie dough. When we're making large batches at Sister Pie, which is this place, we, weigh each round. But when I'm making it in this small batch, I just eyeball it. So I'm going to use the bench scraper to eyeball, cutting it in half. Then just do a little human scale. This one's a little bit more, so I'll just take a piece. And then the next thing I'm going to do is kind of in my hand, round the pie dough, kind of round it into a circle. Then I place it down on the table, press, and then I'm going to kind of just check to see if there's any big cracks and seal them if I can. But you don't need to go too crazy and have it be super perfect. It can still be a little rustic. It's about an inch thick. I'm going to do the next one, kind of pressing it into a circle, placing it back on the bench, pressing down, and then checking for any big cracks. But that's pretty much it. So then I'm going to dip one of them in a little bit of flour and stack them. I'm going to wrap it in a little bit of plastic. We wrap it twice. This helps to make sure that no air or, it doesn't get dried out. It doesn't get too moist. That's what the double wrap does. It also helps if you had some really strong flavors in your refrigerator and you didn't want those flavors to kind of infiltrate this very simple flavor profile. So I'm going to put this in the fridge. And when you make your dough, you want to put it in the refrigerator and let it rest for at least 2 hours before you go to roll it out. So the dough that I'm going to roll out tonight is dough that was made earlier. And so it's had the full amount of time needed to truly chill all the way through so we can have a really successful rollout experience. You could also put the dough in the freezer if you don't think you're going to use it within a week or so. My preference generally, if I'm going to use the freezer, is to actually roll it out first and then freeze the crust. Then you can easily, bake the crust and put the filling inside. I'm feeling like it might be more natural to answer some questions about pie dough first. So has anyone added anything to the chat? Okay. So someone asked, what is the fat percentage of butter? If you want to make a single crust, do you just divide your recipe ingredients in half? So the fat percentage of this butter, I believe, is 83%, 82%, and regular butter is 80%. So it's about 2% more butter, which I'll take it. And then as far as the single crust goes, I guess my question would be, why make one when you can make two? It's like you're doing the same, pretty much the same amount of effort. You could always freeze one of them. If you only had the amount of ingredients for one, you certainly could just make one. But my advice would be to just make the two and have more pie. Shirley asks, what is our preferred all-purpose flour? We use King Arthur all-purpose flour for all of our baked goods that have all-purpose flour in them. Sometimes we use some local grains and flours for, adding them to the pie dough for different textures and flavors, but for the most part, we're using all-purpose. And then Monica said, what do you do if you can't get large cracks out? Well, I'm curious in hearing a little bit more about this, Monica. Do you mean during the process of turning it into a disc. And you can feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask. Oh, okay. You should be able to get the cracks out, because you can treat the dough almost like a Play-Doh at that point. Like, it'll easily fuse together. So I would just use your fingers to fuse it together. And if you have mixed the dough enough, it should be easy to do that. If it's not working, it might mean that the dough is a little bit too dry on the inside. Does that answer your question? Awesome. And then Christine said, you can keep the dough in the fridge for how long? You can keep the dough in the fridge, I would say, for up to a week. If you haven't rolled it out in a week, that's when you'd want to transfer it to the freezer. And in the freezer, I would say it can be there for 6 months to a year. And then when you go to defrost it, if this is just the dough we're talking about and not the rolled out crust, you want to let it thaw for at least a full day in the refrigerator. I like to always kind of pull it a couple days in advance. We use a Plugra. Plugra is the name of the butter that we use. It is a European style butter, so it's made in the US, but it's made in the style of European or French butter. Plugra kind of means more fat in French. It's kind of a shortened version of that. Someone says, Nadia says, when I use all butter crust, I've had some issues with the crust being tough. I think it could be from too much water, but I was curious what your thoughts are. I use a half and half recipe, but really would like to switch to all butter. Gotcha. With the crust being tough, have you noticed that your butter bits are like in bits, or is it becoming kind of homogeneous with the ingredients? Because if it's becoming kind of homogeneous, which I would imagine lard sometimes does, that's when you can kind of easily overwork it, or you're going to get that different texture. The flaky texture comes from the butter bits bursting when they hit the hot oven. That's how those flaky pockets are born. So if you don't have those butter bits, that can prevent it from being kind of as flaky as you want it to be. And sometimes a pie dough crust is difficult to cut. That can mean you've done your job, actually. Like when you cut through the, if it doesn't taste good, that's one thing, but I wouldn't say that just having it be difficult to cut is generally means that it's not right. I use a very sharp serrated knife when I'm cutting through the top crust, and that really helps. So do you have any more questions, or did that kind of answer your question?
Hey Lisa, I just turned on my microphone for just a second. Yeah. So when I do I do like a Crisco butter, so I'd like to go to all butter. Yeah, it feels like I like kind of have to, I can't like eat it with a fork, if that makes sense. Like it's like it tastes good, like the flavor is great, but it just whenever I use I don't know if I'm and I'm gonna try your folding technique. So I do like laminate it. So I don't know if maybe that's overworking it too much. I do like a lamination, like a 2-step kind of process. But so yeah, I didn't know if other people have complained about butter making it too tough.
So are you suggesting perhaps that it might be the butter that's making it tough?
No, I mean, I've had really great all butter crust. I feel like I'm doing something that's making it more tough than it should be. And so I think I'm adding, like when I watched you add a half cup of water, I think I'm definitely adding more water than what I'm probably closer to 3/4 cup or even a little more than that. So I don't, maybe it's too much water.
So something about the water is, I think people, and I don't know where you're starting with the amount, but pie crust recipes over the years have definitely, written that it's kind of like a range of water that you could add. And I think what that has done for a lot of bakers is make them add more water just because the dough is dry when they're bringing it together. So that's something that I've definitely experienced before, because you notice I had to really continue with that process. And the dough always comes together with a half cup of water, even like any time of year, it always comes together with that amount.
Okay.
And so I generally like definitely encourage people to, you know, try to just like see it through to the end before adding any water. If you've continued to do that folding step and it's still not coming together, you know, then you might want to add some water. Maybe your flour measurement was a little bit different that time or something. But I think that could be it. The only other thing I can think of is that you would be overworking it. And so like you said, you're using a lamination technique, which I imagine has you kind of rolling out the dough and then putting more butter in it, or how are you?
I roll it out and then I do folds, and then I refrigerate it and then I roll it out again, basically.
So you're not adding butter when
I'm not adding more butter. I'm just using the same dough and then rolling it twice, essentially.
I see. Certainly every time we roll the dough out, we can, you know, sort of develop the gluten a little bit more. I know that people have used laminated pie dough before. We roll things out multiple times if it's something like our hand pie dough, or something that we don't need to care too much about the shape, or like if it's going to shrink, because that's something that will always happen, is that it will shrink back. So I would try it without the lamination technique, because the folds that we're doing as we're making it are creating lots of layers as well. So it might work to just, you know, bring the dough together and then roll it out and put it into the tin.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Susan asked about lard. I don't have a lot of experience with lard. We've always used butter just because we've wanted the pies to be vegetarian friendly. We're right next to a butcher shop, and I've talked often about the idea of making pie dough with their lard, but we just haven't really gotten around to it. I'm definitely an all butter girl. I think the flavor is just, you know, unmatched, and so that's generally going to be my choice every time. We'll do just these questions from Patrick, and then I'm going to start doing some rollouts. So Patrick said, you mentioned sometimes using local grains. When do you use them, and what sort of flavors do you match them with? Do you have a max percent you'll use and always keep some AP? So that first question, when I first started Sister Pie, I was so all about making like funny little combinations for the pie dough. I wanted to work with all of these, you know, different flours. And so one of the very first recipes I developed for Sister Pie was this apple cheddar rye. And so it's a cheddar rye dough. It's got some rye flour in the crust and aged cheddar cheese. And that pairs like beautifully with apples. When I'm experimenting with any sort of alternative dough, I'm pretty much sticking to 75% all-purpose flour, 25% of the different flour, whatever it is. And then, you know, if I'm feeling good about how it turned out and I want to try and, you know, stretch it and have a little bit, like kind of even the ratio out a little, something that you might want to keep in mind is, like, generally speaking, when you're adding one of those alternative grains, a lot of times they're going to need a little more moisture to come together. So you might want to just, you know, do a teaspoon or two more of liquid, but I would try it always first with, you know, the same amount of liquid and see how it comes together. Another one that we do is, the brandy pecan pie. That's like a nutty dough. So we use all-purpose flour, and then like finely ground pecans kind of act as the alternative flour in that, and that is really good in a pecan pie because you get extra pecans. And then, have we experimented with fats other than butter? Not really. There have definitely been times in the past where I've tried to make a vegan crust, but it's been a really long time. And it was, I think, back when I was renting space out of a commercial kitchen, I did a vegan Valentine's brunch with one of the people who worked in the commercial kitchen with me. And so I did it with, I think, a mix of coconut oil and like vegan butter. And I think it turned out pretty good. I haven't really revisited it since then, but that's the one thing that I've experimented with. And the other thing I'll say is that sometimes we have a recipe where we might put buttermilk in instead of the water. And so that, of course, is like another fat that really enriches the dough. And we've used that for, like in the cookbook, I believe, there's a recipe for a buckwheat buttermilk dough that we use for our egg on top galettes. And so it's got buckwheat as the alternative flour and then buttermilk as the liquid. And it is very nice. So that's a good one to check out. I'm going to get back to my station. And I'm going to do one of the crusts with the camera kind of back here. And then I'm going to try and kind of put it on my table for the second one so that we can have two different angles. Okay. Just going to get a quick sip of water. Okay, so like I said, this dough was made earlier, so it's nice and firm. It is the same temperature that the butter was when we originally took it out to make the dough, so it's definitely ready to be rolled out. I need a few different things for when I'm rolling out pie dough. Let me get rid of all this stuff. I need a 9-inch tin. Oh, thanks. 9-inch tin. I like to use the aluminum tins. These ones, of course, are disposable, so we use them at Sister Pie when we're selling our pies. In general, aluminum, metal, I find that to be the best conductor of heat for when I'm making pie dough or crust. And then I'm going to have a little pastry cutter. This bowl I'm going to use, actually, this is the wrong bowl. Okay. It's a lot of bowls we have here in the Sister Pie kitchen, but we need a particular one. I think it's this one. We use a bowl as the measuring tool, so it's like the perfect diameter for fitting into the 9-inch. All right, so I've got the cutter, the bowl, the tin. I use rolling pin. We use a maple rolling pin with the tapered end. I love using these rolling pins. It's very light in my hands, so I feel like I have good control over what I'm doing, and it helps in kind of each step of the rollout process. So I'm about to show you. First, I'm going to lightly flour my surface. Place the round on it. Kind of get some flour on both sides. And I'm going to start, this is what I consider step one, by banging the dough with the rolling pin. Go across one side, I rotate it. Go across another side. And I do this until the dough becomes kind of malleable. And it's now about a 1/2 inch thick. So, we started with 1 inch of thickness when we first shaped the dough. Now I'm pounding it down to about a 1/2 inch. Now I'm going to focus on rolling out the edges first. We are intentional about rolling out the edges first because they're going to get warm more quickly than the center. So it's easy to over roll them. So we're going to focus on those and then work from the center until we bring it all together. So I'm going to rest the rolling pin on the side of the dough. I have the center of the rolling pin touching the dough, and then I've got one end of this tapered pin just sitting on the table. So I'm going to go around one time. So what I do is I put my hands on the pin, I push forward, I lift up the pin, rotate it, and push forward, really making sure that you're using your strength. You see how I kind of put my body over it, grabbing flour as I need, pushing forward, lifting the pin, and I've just got one more. Okay, so at this point, you know, the circular nature of it is a little bit off, but it's going to be fine. I just wanted to show you how you can see all that beautiful marbled butter in there. All right. Now I'm going to focus on rolling it out from the center to create a size a little bit bigger than this to start. So I place my rolling pin on the center of the dough, hands on the pin, pushing forward almost all the way to the edge. We want to stop about a ½ inch before the edge because we've already worked on that. Rotate it, push forward, rotate, push forward, rotate, and just continuing to do this. Kind of, you know, checking the shape and making adjustments as needed. Looks like it's about the size. Okay, so it's a little bigger than this tin. So now I've got a dough that's a little bit thinner in the center, so I can go back to rolling out the edges and then kind of roll it all evenly until it's 1/8 of an inch thickness. So at this step, I'm always feeling the dough. I'm kind of putting my hand around it so that I know where it is too thick or too thin. So I'm going to go back to those edges, like I said. Now at this point, I'm trying to get it to be the size of that 13-inch bowl that I found. So really just kind of rolling all the way. It becomes a lot easier to roll out once you're at this point. So you see me going pretty fast. Sometimes I'll pull the pin back toward me. And I really only add flour to the table if the dough is sticking to the pin or the table. Otherwise, you don't want to add too much flour because it will really dry out the dough. All right, feeling all around. All right, moment of truth. No, needs to be a little bit bigger. If you don't have a bowl that's perfectly the size, which, you know, would make sense because you're not a bakery, you could also use like a ruler. If you live local, we do sell the bowls, although we're not open for regular hours right now, so we can talk about that later. All right. Flipping it over, I can see crust all around just a little bit, so we're good to go. I put my hand on the bowl. I cut around a little bit of scrap. There it is. I'm going to fold it, gently lift it into a buttered tin, place it in the center. Now remember, I'm going to show you this another time, but it's going to be closer up. I'm going to unfold it, move the dough around to make sure that it's evenly placed. And then I'm going to use my fingers and palm to press it all the way into the tin. Okay, now comes the really fun part. We're going to roll up the dough to create a ring of dough and then crimp it. So I start by lifting this part of the dough that's directly across from me with my thumbs. And I'm going to use my right thumb to roll the dough down while I take my left thumb and kind of adhere what I've just rolled onto the rest of the dough. And it'll become probably a lot easier for you to see it when I bring the computer down. But you want to think about rolling up a piece of paper so tightly that no air could escape. We're trying to create this really solid, tight ring of dough. Okay, it looks like this. So it's a good sign that there's a little bit of crust or dough kind of hanging off. You want it to be pretty secure on top of the tin though. You don't want it to be like fully hanging off because that could cause the crimp to unravel when you go to bake it later. So speaking of crimps, that's what's next. I'm going to use my left hand, because I'm right-handed, to make a C. And then my thumb will meet in the center of the C, and that creates that crimp shape. So I'll start down here with the C in the center of or on the inside of it, and the thumb meeting it here. You're going to use your thumb to push, really push, creating a crimp. So the C is really just there to kind of help the thumb know where to go and to help make sure that you're doing an even crimp. But it's the thumb that is really actually doing, like, putting the pressure on the dough. Now, I should have cut my nails because they're a little sharp. So they're kind of, making little indentations in the dough. So that's definitely something that you want to think about. But if you do get those indentations and you tear the dough a little bit, you can always just use your finger, just like you did when you were fixing the cracks. Just either take a piece of scrap dough and kind of stick it in there, or just kind of press it with your hand and it'll seal it up. Okay, so now I'm going to go put this in the freezer. We keep our crimps in the freezer because we bake them from the freezer when we go to blind bake them, and I can talk about that in the second part of the Q&A. So I'm going to put this in the freezer. I'm going to bring my camera down, roll out one more, and then we'll get to talking all about it. Hey, let's try this. All right, so you're probably not going to be able to see my face through most of this, but hopefully it'll work great. There's the dough. All right, that first step is pounding on the dough. Now, sometimes you'll pound on the dough and you'll find a crack at this stage in the process. So once again, you can just kind of press it together. But it's about a ½ inch thick and it's malleable. Now I'm going to roll out the edges. So I'm placing the pin on the center of the dough, rolling pin on the table, press forward, lift the pin, turn it, press forward, lift the pin, rotate the dough, press forward, lift the pin, rotate, and we're doing it. Okay, so now I've got this. Now I'm going to roll out from the center. So I'm going to push forward using all of my might, stopping about a ½ inch before the edge, rotate it, push forward, really putting my upper body into it, as you can tell, because it's tough to roll it out. So you gotta try and do this if you can. You'll start to notice that the dough might bubble up, and that's going to start to be your indication that it's almost time to move on to that final step of the rollout. But I'm going to do a little bit more. Okay, so now it's about the size of this tin or a little bit bigger. I'm going to focus now on rolling the whole thing out to 1/8 of an inch thickness. So I'm rolling all the way to the edge. It's a lot easier to roll it out at this point. A little thicker over here. Kind of pulling it back. All right, let's see. It's pretty good. There's a couple of little areas, but that is not a big deal. I'm going to fold it, transfer it into the tin, unfold it, make sure that it's evenly placed, press it all the way into the tin, and now I'm going to do that roll up step. So I've got, actually, might be better if you see it from this angle. We'll find out. So I'm going to take my right thumb and roll down while my left thumb is pressing what I just rolled onto the edge of the tin. So you want to think about taking that thumb and really using it to completely like twist the dough. Now I'm going to go to the other side and see if that's a good view. So now you can kind of see it from this angle. See, I'm almost like pinching and twisting it. But you can tell that I've really adhered it. You see that sort of angle. Okay, now it's time to do the crimp, and I'm going to make the C shape with the thumb like this. So here's the C and here's the thumb. Like I said, I'm going to push with the thumb. That's how it creates kind of that dramatic crimp. And you're kind of thinking of almost like pushing down, like pushing sort of down into the tin. We really want these crimps to sit like fully on top of the tin. Sometimes if it's taking a little bit more time to roll it out, the dough might start to get kind of warm. At that point, you might want to put just a little bit of flour on your fingers. Okay, just going to patch up any little holes. I'm going to go put this in the freezer and come back, and we're going to hop right into the rest of the questions. Okay, here we are. I'm going to dive into the questions, and I'll see. Let me just look them up. Wow, there's a lot of questions. All right. First, what I'm going to do is actually I'm going to talk quickly about the process of blind baking, which is what you would do next. So I usually let my crust fully freeze in the freezer, especially because I'm using an aluminum tin. If you're not using an aluminum tin, you just want it to kind of chill for a little bit in your fridge, just to kind of get that butter back to a really cool temperature. It'll have a really nice bake once it hits the hot oven. But you could do like 15 minutes in your freezer too. So then I put a sheet of aluminum foil on top of the crust, kind of wrap it around the crimps, and then I fill that with dried beans all the way to the top. Then I bake it in the oven for, 25 minutes to a half an hour at a high temperature. So probably like 450 degrees. And then I take it out once I can see that the edges are a nice deep golden brown. I put it out to cool, and then in a few minutes I take the beans and the foil out, and then I dramatically decrease the oven temperature, put the filling in, and bake it at the lower temperature. So the idea just generally being that we're baking the pie crust at a high temperature so that it gets nice and golden brown and also crispy. And then the filling is needing to be baked at a lower, more gentle temperature. And that's the case for, 90% of the pies that we make here at Sister Pie. The only time that we don't do the blind bake is when we're doing a double crusted pie, but it still has a similar technique. We start it in, or similar, I guess, concept. We start it in a hot oven is what I'm trying to say, like a super hot oven to get it golden brown, and then drop the temperature. Do we have any questions about that before I go into the other questions? Cassie says, should the bottom be sort of wet looking? I find having the beans doesn't really set the bottom. So one thing I think to keep in mind is that, yeah, it is definitely not a full bake. A blind bake is really a par bake. So when I take the beans out, the bottom, I wouldn't describe it as wet so much, but I wouldn't describe it as totally baked. It should continue to bake when you put the filling in. So it's not going to look as done as the outside crust, but it should continue to bake once the filling's in and it goes into the oven. So that is okay. If you're making a pie that doesn't go back in the oven, like pudding pie or something, then what I do is I will kind of like remove the beans and egg wash it and kind of bake it almost all the way. So it's like pretty much done. And then let that cool and put the pudding inside. And then Nadia wants to know if we add anything to prevent a soggy bottom, such as crust dust or vanilla before blind baking. Wow, I've never heard of vanilla doing that. That's cool. It depends on the pie. Like if I'm doing the salted maple pie, I'm just pouring the salted maple filling in, and that's that. But if I'm doing a fruit pie, depending on the fruit, sometimes I'll do a crust dust, which is equal parts flour and sugar. That kind of helps to soak up some of those juices. Another thing that we'll do for a lot of our recipes, especially the berry recipes in the summer, is we'll do a layer of cream cheese that creates a nice solid base that's a little bit harder to kind of go through with the fruit. So that creates a good crust as well. But we don't do it before blind baking. I'm just reading here. Yeah, we don't do it before blind baking. It happens after the blind bake. And Fran wants to know if we poke the bottom with a fork. No, because we're keeping the beans in the whole time, those are going to allow, because you would poke with a fork if you wouldn't want the dough to kind of puff up, but the beans kind of do that job for us. And I'm going to now scroll up. Wow, this class went by so fast. I don't know if this is the first time we've done this time frame. Maybe we did like during COVID times, but it really went by. So I want to make sure I can answer your questions. Susan says, do you roll dough out straight from the refrigerator or does it warm up? You definitely want it to be straight from the refrigerator so that you're entirely in control of the temperature change. And so that first step we're doing where we're banging it, that is starting that process of kind of bringing it to a warmer temperature, but by no means are we trying to get it warm. The goal is that it stays cold to some degree the whole time that we're rolling it out. Do you butter the rim of the pan too, or just the inside? Definitely the rim of the pan. In fact, I find that can be one of the most important parts to butter because it helps the crimp adhere on top. Kind of helps it like sit right there. For the 9-inch pie pan, the diameter of the template is 13 inches. So we're looking for about a 4-inch, 4 inches over what your pie pan is. So, you know, the recipe that you'll get is kind of good for making a couple different sizes because it's a little bit bigger than the size that I was just using here. So you should be able to roll it out to 1/8 of an inch for a 10-inch pie too. Joanna wants to know if I can offer tips to prevent overdone edges during baking. I use foil, but always fumble to connect the edges of the foil pieces. So generally speaking, with the way that we make the pie, if we do the blind bake and we've covered the crimps with the foil, it doesn't burn at that point, and then it doesn't burn when we're baking the pie at the lower temperature because it's just such a low temperature that it's not really going to burn. What I've seen burn is like fruit juices that bubble over. So I'm wondering if maybe that is a fruit pie that you're baking, because a lot of times that can be fruit. And so, you know, that could depend on if you were making a crumble pie and there wasn't enough crumble right there. You want the fruit pie to be bubbling in the very center. That's how you know that it's done. Are you talking about
yeah, I was talking about fruit pie.
Okay.
Apple,
yes.
apple specifically.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Christine says that I do not have a counter space to roll out on. I need to use my dining room table. Do you have a mat suggestion for rolling on, and how do I prevent the mat from sliding as I roll? So I don't have a mat suggestion off the top of my head, although there's a couple of ideas. I think like a silicone mat would work. I also think like a wooden cutting board would work. Like if you can get like a bigger wooden cutting board. And then I don't know what your dining room table is made of or something, but like when I'm trying to keep a cutting board in place, I'll put a couple pieces of wet paper towel underneath, and that sort of helps it stay in place. I hope that that's helpful. And Susan said that she's trying the cranberry pie from the cookbook, which is a great idea. It's one of my very favorite pies that we've ever made. I also want to use this opportunity to let you all know that there are some fun recipes on our Substack page. Lana's going to drop the link in the chat. And today we posted our vision for 2030. So a lot of the work that we've been doing this summer on the future of the business is at that link. So take a look if you'd like to after the class. Christine says, random question. I'm a single person. I'm interested in half pies and found a half pie plate. Do I need to adjust baking times? Wow. I've never, ever seen that. I think that you wouldn't need to adjust it so much for the blind bake because you're still going to be trying to bake that same kind of crust. It's just a different amount. But I think for the filling, sure. It's always just going to be about what the final product is supposed to look like when it comes out of the oven. So, you know, if you were making a pie out of the sister pie book and it was a fruit pie, you would want to make sure that the fruit in the center is like bubbling up, which means that it's kind of activating the starch. If it's something like the salted maple pie, it's going to kind of souffle a little bit and have just a little diameter in the center that's jiggly. So if the recipe you're using has clear instructions on what it's supposed to look like, I would follow that more than the time. And maybe just like, you know, start it at a lower amount of time and check it more frequently. Cassie's a Substack subscriber. Thank you so much. Nadia wonders if there's considerations of doubling or tripling the recipe. For the dough or just anything at all? I guess I don't really have an answer. I think the considerations are just double check your math because I've certainly made mistakes with that. But with the pie dough, it's pretty, you can double and triple it pretty easily because that's how we make our dough here is we've, bigger size of the recipe that I showed you. All right, well, it's 7 o'clock. Does anyone have any burning questions before we end for the night? Thank you. I will let you know. I don't know if anyone signed up. We have another virtual class this Saturday afternoon. It's a scone class. I'm really excited about it. We still have spots available if you're interested. We'd love to hear your feedback on the class. When we send you the video and stuff, let us know what you thought. And hopefully we'll be doing more virtual classes too. So thank you again. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.